I erased her business reputation, one review at a time. I still remember the sting in my chest when her email hit my inbox. A cold line item, sterile black letters against a white screen. Cleaning fee, $1,200. I blanked. Read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition could make it vanish. My stomach dropped. Cleaning fee, for what? I had spent the final night scrubbing every corner of that apartment, until my knuckles were raw. The counters shined, the bathroom tiles gleamed. The fridge was emptier than my bank account. Even the carpet smelled like detergent. And yet here it was a bill designed not to clean dirt, but to dirty my spirit. It wasn't just about the money, though. God knows, $1,200 could cover rent in my new place, or groceries for months. No, it was the arrogance behind it. She believed she could slap me with a fake charge and I'd roll over quietly. She thought I was just another powerless tenant who'd accept humiliation as the cost of moving on. My jaw tightened. My fists curled. This wasn't negligence. This was theft dressed up as policy. I could almost see her smirk as she clicked send, imagining me defeated, imagining me too broke, too busy, too small to fight back. But what she miscalculated was that I wasn't alone. I carried with me the same fire my parents had when they crossed oceans with nothing but suitcases and stubborn hope. I carried the pride of every immigrant who had ever been told, be grateful and keep quiet, and I carried the conviction that silence only feeds bullies. I paced the empty apartment one last time. The walls bare, the echo of my footsteps hollow but steady. I replayed every scrub, every sweep, every sleepless hour I had invested in leaving this place spotless. She wasn't charging me for cleaning, she was charging me for daring to leave with dignity intact. That was her mistake. What she didn't realize was that her little scam was about to spark a chain reaction she could never stop. $1,200. For some, it's a careless swipe of a credit card, a weekend getaway, a number that barely registers. For me, it was survival. It was the money I had scraped together from late-night shifts, from tutoring sessions wedged between classes, from saying no to dinners out and yes to instant noodles. It was the fragile cushion that was supposed to make my move possible. My parents had warned me. Moving isn't just about carrying boxes. It's about carrying burdens. Every dollar matters. And now, one email had threatened to erase months of sacrifice in an instant. I stared at my checking account, the digits staring back like a cruel joke. I had budgeted everything with precision. First month's rent, deposit, moving truck, utilities. There was no room for surprise charges. That $1,200 wasn't optional, it was essential. Without it, I risked overdraft fees, late payments, a spiral of stress I had seen break stronger people than me. I thought about calling my parents. But what would I say? That their child, the one they'd bragged about for studying hard and making it on their own, had been duped by a landlord's fake bill? No. I wouldn't burden them with that shame. The weight of it pressed down harder than the numbers in my bank account. It wasn't just the money, it was the humiliation. She held all the power. She had my deposit, my reputation as a tenant, even the ability to smear my rental history if I resisted. And me, I had nothing but the truth. And truth, I learned, doesn't always pay the bills. I tried to sleep that night, but the thought kept gnawing at me. Why did she think she could get away with this? Because she had before. Because people like me, the ones working two jobs, the ones whose names carry accents, the ones who can't afford lawyers, are expected to swallow injustice quietly. That's the unspoken rule of the system. Landlords play gatekeeper, tenants play beggar, and those who protest are blacklisted. It's not just greed. It's an entire structure built to remind us who belongs and who doesn't. I felt my chest tighten, not just with anger but with clarity. This wasn't about her wanting money, it was about her wanting control. And the cruelest part, she thought she already had it. She thought the $1,200 fee was my leash, her way of keeping me small, compliant, voiceless. But what she didn't know was that I had learned it from every time I'd been underestimated. From every time I'd been told, keep your head down, don't make waves, be grateful. I was done being grateful for scraps. That night, as a city outside buzzed with life I couldn't afford to join, I made myself a promise. I would not let her write the ending to the story. She thought this was about squeezing money out of me, but she had no idea what she had unleashed. Because for me, this wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity. And when I uncovered her pattern, I knew I wasn't her first victim, but I swore I'd be her last. Her name floated around the neighborhood like a storm cloud. At first, it was just whispers, casual complaints muttered at the corner laundromat, or a sigh shared in the hallway between tired tenants. But when I began listening closely, I realized the pattern was too sharp, too precise to be coincidence. She had built her empire on dust, on fear, on the backs of people who couldn't afford to fight back. She owned 3 apartment complexes on the east side of town, all with the same gleaming photos in her listings wide-angled, shots of sunlight streaming across freshly polished floors, promises of luxury living at affordable rates. But behind those photos was a different story. Peeling paint, faulty wiring, mold that grew in corners like uninvited guests. Tenants said maintenance requests disappeared into a void. Complaints were laughed at. Every issue came with the same shrug. That's not covered, and if you pressed too hard, she reminded you of the waiting list. Dozens ready to take your place. You were replaceable. Then there were the fees. Oh, the fees. Moving in came with hidden administrative costs. Moving out came with impossible cleaning charges. Carpets that had been spotless suddenly required professional restoration. Kitchens that smelled like bleach were billed for deep sanitization. One tenant claimed she had been charged for wall repainting, even though she'd lived there barely 3 months. Another showed me his receipt, $900 for trash removal, when he had hauled every bag himself. She thrived on the gray space between what's legal and what's ethical. Technically, she could write almost anything on that final statement. Technically, tenants could challenge it in court, but she knew what courts cost, how long they dragged on, and how many people lived paycheck to paycheck. Her genius, if you can call cruelty genius, was knowing the line between injustice and intimidation. She didn't need to win in court. She only needed to scare people away from trying. What made it worse was her demeanor. She carried herself like a queen surveying subjects who should be grateful for the crumbs she tossed their way. At tenant meetings, her tone was clipped, rehearsed, dripping with the condescension of someone who believed she was smarter than everyone in the room. She loved to remind renters that dozens of others are waiting for your unit. As if their homes were lottery tickets she handed out on a whim. She'd stroll through her buildings in designer heels, eyes skimming past the peeling paint like it wasn't there, offering fake smiles as though she were doing tenants a favor by letting them live in her properties. I began piecing together more than whispers. Online forums painted her in sharper strokes. Former tenants wrote stories of security deposits that vanished into thin air. A mother of two posted about losing her last $600 to a cleaning bill that left her scrambling to feed her children. A student from abroad described arriving to find broken locks and pests, but being told repairs would take months. The comments piled up like a mountain of receipts, all pointing to the same truth. She was running a business built on exploitation. And yet, despite the trail of suffering, she kept winning. The city hadn't fined her. Courts hadn't touched her. She was too small to attract headlines, too crafty to get caught outright. She hid behind LLCs and contracts that protected her, daring anyone to challenge her authority. She thrived in the shadows, preying on the idea that no one story was strong enough to bring her down. That's what made her so smug, so untouchable. She truly believed she was above consequences. When one tenant moved out angry, she knew another desperate one would move in tomorrow. To her, renters weren't people with lives and struggles. They were line items in her balance sheet, bodies filling spaces that made her money. If one broke, another could replace them. But arrogance is a dangerous thing. It blinds you. It makes you sloppy. It makes you underestimate the wrong person at the wrong time. She didn't just overcharge me. She underestimated me. And that was the crack in her empire. Because her arrogance blinded her to the one thing she couldn't: control the internet. I wasn't born with money. I wasn't born with safety nets or backup plans. Every step I've taken, every bill I've paid, every small victory I've claimed, it all came from working harder than I thought humanly possible. I grew up watching my parents stretch every dollar until it frayed. They never complained. But I saw the quiet calculations in their eyes at the grocery store, the way they weighed milk against rice, rent against medicine. From them, I learned the first rule of survival: nothing is free, and everything comes at a cost. That lesson never left me. When I finally moved out on my own, I carried it like armor. I said no to luxuries that other people my age barely thought twice about. While friends posted photos of weekend getaways, I was pulling double shifts at the diner, smiling at strangers while my legs ached from standing 12 hours straight. When classmates went out for drinks, I stayed behind, laptop open, tutoring students online to cover the electricity bill. Every dollar I saved was a small rebellion, a quiet declaration that I would not sink. And the sacrifices weren't just financial, they were emotional, too. Every no I gave to friends, every birthday I missed because I couldn't afford the gift, every time I stayed home while others lived freely, it all stacked up into a mountain of restraint. I told myself it would be worth it, that one day I'd look back and see those sacrifices as bricks laid on the road toward something greater. That's why her $1,200 bill wasn't just a number. It was months of skipped dinners, hours of aching feet, weekends of saying no to joy. It was my pride as much as my money. She wasn't just stealing from my wallet, she was stealing from my life, from the countless sacrifices I'd already made just to stand on my own. But here's the thing about living lean, about surviving on grit. It teaches you skills that money can't buy. When you don't have cash to throw at problems, you learn creativity. When you can't afford shortcuts, you learn persistence. I didn't grow up with privilege, but I grew up with resourcefulness. While some kids played video games, I was figuring out how to fix the family's old computer because we couldn't afford a repairman. While others paid for essay editors, I learned to sharpen my writing until it cut like a blade. Those skills stayed with me. By the time I was old enough to rent an apartment, I wasn't just hardworking, I was stubbornly capable. I knew how to research, how to dig through records, how to find the truth hidden in fine print. I wasn't afraid of words or of wielding them. If she thought she could bury me in paperwork and intimidation, she didn't realize I was already fluent in surviving systems designed to silence people like me. And there was something else, a quiet fire inside me, passed down from generations before me. My parents had crossed oceans, learned new languages, endured humiliation with their heads held high. Also, I could live a little freer. I carried that history in my chest. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about their journey, about how they had been underestimated, dismissed, treated like shadows, and yet they stood tall. If they could do that, then I could face down one arrogant landlord. Still, I wasn't reckless. I knew revenge had to be smart, not just loud. Rage burns fast, but strategy lasts. And strategy was my advantage. I didn't need fists or lawyers, I had something sharper. I had patience. I had persistence. I had the ability to tell a story so clearly, so vividly, that once people heard it, they couldn't unhear it. That was my gift. Words were my weapon. So when she tried to silence me with a bill, she didn't know she was dealing with someone who had spent years learning how to speak, not with money, not with power, but with truth. And truth, when sharpened, cuts deeper than any scam. That's why I couldn't just walk away, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every student who had been cheated, every immigrant family who had been squeezed, every tenant who had ever swallowed injustice, because they couldn't afford to fight back. I carried them with me too. I owed it to them to answer arrogance with something louder than silence. And when I realized my words could hurt her more than money ever could, I sharpened them into a weapon. I didn't strike right away. At first, I did what any reasonable tenant would do. I confronted her. I wrote a polite email asking for an itemized breakdown of the so-called cleaning fee. No reply. I followed up 2 days later, attaching photos I had taken of the apartment before handing over the keys. Counters gleaming, bathroom spotless, carpet vacuumed to perfection. Still silence. So I called. Her assistant answered first, a voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "She's very busy right now," she said. "But we'll get back to you." Days passed. No one got back to me. I called again. This time, the landlord herself picked up, and her voice was colder than the email she'd sent. "Look," she said, not even bothering with hello, "that's the policy. Everyone pays cleaning fees. You're not special." I clenched my jaw, but the apartment was spotless. I cleaned it myself. She cut me off with a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "People always think it's clean, but we have professional standards. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't rent." I felt the heat rise in my chest. It wasn't just arrogance, it was contempt. She wasn't explaining. She wasn't justifying. She was enjoying it, savoring the power imbalance like it was her favorite wine. To her, I wasn't a person. I was just another tenant to purr or too tired to resist. Still, I tried one more time. I sent a certified letter citing tenant rights, quoting state law about reasonable cleaning charges. I laid out my case with the precision of someone who had done their homework. Weeks passed, no answer. Finally, an envelope arrived, not with a refund, but with another notice. If I didn't pay within 30 days, she would pursue legal remedies. That was her final word. Not reason, not compromise, but a threat. I sat with that letter in my hands, the ink blurring as my eyes burned with frustration. For a moment, I felt small, crushed beneath the weight of her confidence, her certainty that I would cave. I thought of my parents, of every sacrifice they had made, and wondered if maybe I was foolish for even trying. Maybe this was the way the system worked, the powerful crush, the powerless endure. But the longer I stared at her threat, the more something inside me shifted. Helplessness curdled into resolve. Anger sharpened into clarity. She wanted me to feel voiceless, but I wasn't voiceless. I had the one thing she couldn't buy, the one thing she couldn't silence: my story. It was like the air before a storm, thick, electric, waiting for lightning. I could feel something building inside me, a surge of determination that made my hands steady and my heart pound with purpose. She thought this was the end of the conversation, but it was only the beginning. That's when I decided if she wanted to play dirty, I'd show her just how clean I could get. I sat down at my desk one night, the letter she'd sent me still resting like poison on the corner. My hands hovered above the keyboard, trembling not with fear but with focus. She had underestimated me. She thought I'd vanish into silence, Too poor, too busy, too beaten down to push back. What she didn't count on was that silence had never been my style. Words were my inheritance, my weapon. My way of cutting through arrogance with truth. And I was about to use them. The first review was sharp, precise, and calm. No screaming, no insults. Just the raw truth laid out with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. I described the spotless state of my apartment when I left, the photos I'd taken, and the fraudulent bill that followed. I explained how her cleaning fees were not only unfair but exploitative. I uploaded my pictures, time-stamped undeniable proof. Google, Yelp, Facebook, I hit them all. One after another like arrows aimed at the heart of her empire. Then I waited. For a day, there was silence. No reaction, no emails. I almost wondered if I'd made a mistake. If my words would simply vanish into the noise of the internet. But then something happened. A stranger left a comment beneath my review. This happened to me too. She charged me $900 for trash removal when I'd left the place spotless. Thank you for speaking up. That was all it took. The second review went live the next morning, more detailed, more biting. This time, I included not just my story but a link to forums where other tenants had whispered about their experiences. I wove their accounts together with mine, painting a pattern too obvious to ignore. It wasn't one bad experience. It was a scheme, a scam, a business model built on bleeding people dry. This time, the silence didn't last. 2 days later, I received an email. Not from her lawyer, not from her assistant, but from the landlord herself. Her words were short, clipped, but the tremor behind them was almost visible. You need to take those reviews down immediately. They're defamatory. If you don't, I'll be forced to pursue legal action. I smiled at the screen. Defamatory? No. I wasn't making things up, I was telling the truth. And truth, when spoken aloud, is the one thing people like her can't fight. I didn't reply. I didn't take anything down. Instead, I wrote my third review. This one wasn't just a story. It was a manifesto. I laid out the timeline of her scams, included screenshots of others' complaints, linked to tenants' Facebook posts. I ended it with a line that spread like wildfire. She charged me $1,200 to clean an apartment that was already spotless. So I cleaned her reviews instead. That was a spark. Within hours, the comment section under my post came alive. Dozens of tenants added their voices. She did this to me too. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for speaking up. I was too scared. What had once been isolated whispers turned into a chorus. A storm of voices too loud to ignore. And then came the private messages. People I had never met reached out to me, telling me their stories. A single mother who'd been billed half her deposit for stained walls when she'd only hung posters with tape. A retired veteran who'd fought for this country, but lost his last savings to her professional cleaning fees. A student from abroad who had left the U.S. with debt because she drained his deposit. Each story burned hotter than the last. Meanwhile, I kept watching the platforms. Her once spotless 5-star rating began to plummet, 1 star at a time. New reviews popped up daily, echoing the same pattern of scams. Prospective tenants saw them, read them, and walked away. The empire she'd built on silence began to crumble, brick by brick under the weight of the truth. Then came the panic. She called me this time, her voice sharp and desperate. Listen, she snapped, this has gone too far. You don't know who you're dealing with. Do you think some little reviews will hurt me? Do you know how many tenants I have? Her arrogance was still there, but it was thinner now, cracked around the edges. I could hear something beneath it, fear. I didn't argue. I didn't even respond. I just let the silence hang heavy until she finally hung up. The next week, her tone changed again. Another email. This one different, softer, almost pleading. If we refund your deposit, will you consider removing your posts? This is damaging my business. But it was too late. It wasn't about my deposit anymore. The story had outgrown me. It wasn't one tenant versus one landlord, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, united by truth. And once people find their voice, you can't shove it back into silence. Her business began to unravel. Units that had once filled easily now sat vacant. Rental applications dropped. Local forums lit up with warnings about her name. Even her Facebook business page, once polished and pristine, was flooded with comments calling her out. She tried deleting them, but for every one removed, two more appeared. The truth was multiplying faster than she could contain it. And still, the reviews kept coming. Former tenants who had left years ago returned to add their experiences. Emboldened by the wave, my inbox became a gathering place for stories of survival and frustration. A community born out of shared injustice. People thanked me not just for speaking, but for reminding them they weren't alone. And in their thanks, I felt the weight of something larger than revenge. This was justice. Her downfall wasn't cinematic, it was digital. A slow-motion collapse played out on screens. One review, one rating, one lost tenant at a time. The power she had lorded over others evaporated in the one space she couldn't control. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the story broke wide open. It started as a Flickr one screenshot of my review, shared on Twitter with the caption, "Landlord scam student gets exposed." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Retweets piled up, Facebook groups shared it, and Instagram stories echoed the line that had become the battle cry. She charged me $1,200 to clean an apartment that was already spotless, so I cleaned her reviews instead. By the end of the week, the internet had turned my story into a symbol. Hashtags began trending locally, then regionally. Hashtag cleaned out and hashtag tenant justice appeared in feeds alongside memes mocking her arrogance. Someone even photoshopped her business logo with a mop sweeping it away. What once felt like a private humiliation had transformed into a public reckoning. Former tenants joined in, each adding their own voices. Dozens of reviews flooded the platforms in a single day. Every new testimony told a variation of the same story and return deposits. Fraudulent damage fees, intimidation. The mosaic of anger was undeniable, a tapestry of injustice woven together for the world to see. Where she once hid behind contracts in silence, the internet now held up a mirror, and she couldn't look away. And then came the news outlets. Local journalists, hungry for a story about exploitation and power, reached out to me. They wanted interviews. They wanted details. They wanted proof, and I had all of it. Photos, receipts, emails dripping with her arrogance. By the time the first article ran, the narrative was clear. This wasn't just one greedy landlord. This was a system of abuse exposed by the very people it tried to silence. Her empire cracked under the pressure. Vacancies spread across her properties as applications dried up. Tenants broke their leases early, citing unsafe and unfair treatment. Lawyers began circling, sensing blood in the water. Whispers of class action lawsuits drifted across the forums. For the first time, she wasn't the predator, she was the hunted. And the community, they roared with validation. "This is what justice looks like," one commenter wrote under the article. Another replied, "We've all been scammed by landlords like her." Finally, someone fought back. People tagged friends, saying, "Read this. This is us, this is our fight." The story stopped being about me and her. It became about everyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of power tilted against them. The backlash was more than financial. It was cultural. She became a cautionary tale whispered among landlords, a villain turned into a meme, a symbol of everything broken in the housing market. And every time her name appeared online, it wasn't in glossy ads or polished posts, it was in threads dripping with scorn. But the most powerful shift wasn't what happened to her. It was what happened to us. Tenants who once felt voiceless began to speak with pride. Immigrant students, young families, working class renters, they saw themselves in my fight. They saw that their dignity wasn't disposable. They saw that a single voice, sharpened with truth, could cut through lies designed to keep them small. For weeks, the ripple effect continued. Screenshots spread across TikTok with dramatic readings of my reviews. Commentators framed it as a David versus Goliath battle for tenant rights. Activists used it as proof in campaigns demanding reform. The story had outgrown both of us. It became fuel for a movement. And through it all, I watched in quiet awe. What had started as a $1,200 scam had turned into something bigger. A shared act of resistance. A declaration that we would not be robbed in silence anymore. But the sweetest victory wasn't watching her business fall, it was what came next. In the end, the money didn't matter. $1,200 may have sparked the fire, but it was never really about the bill. It was about dignity, the part of you that feels smaller every time someone abuses their power and expects you to swallow it in silence. What I reclaimed wasn't a refund. It was a proof that my voice, my story, was stronger than her lies. Because here's the truth, words are power. Stories are weapons. Silence is surrender. She tried to bury me in paperwork, in contracts, in the language of policy, but once I turned my experience into a story, she couldn't control it anymore. She couldn't spin it, couldn't sanitize it, couldn't invoice it away. That's the magic of speaking at the moment your truth leaves your lips or your keyboard. It belongs to the world and no bully can erase it. What happened to her business wasn't just about lost tenants or bad publicity. It was about accountability. Every scammer, every fraud, every arrogant landlord who thinks they're untouchable learned something. Watching her downfall. Greed has a short shelf life when the people you exploit find their voice. And what happened to me wasn't just about revenge. It was about transformation. I went from feeling like a powerless tenant, just another name on a lease, to realizing I carried something far greater than money. I carried a story others needed to hear. That realization lifted me out of humiliation and into pride. This wasn't only my fight. It was for every immigrant student working 2 jobs just to afford rent. It was for every family pressured into paying fees they didn't know. It was for every renter who swallowed their anger because they thought no one would listen. My story became theirs. Their voices amplified mine. Together, we show that truth is louder than intimidation. And that's what I want you to remember: no scammer, no bully, no greedy landlord is bigger than the truth. They might have the money, the lawyers, the contracts, but we have each other. We have our words. We have the courage to share what they hope we'll hide. That's where real power lies, not in silence, but in the telling. So if you've ever felt small, if you've ever felt cheated, if you've ever felt like your pain didn't matter, let this be proof that it does. Let this be the reminder that justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's the moment your story echoes so loudly that it can't be ignored. Sometimes it's the way a community rises up behind you and says, "We see you. We believe you. We are with you." Because revenge isn't always about fire, it's about leaving your mark so they can never erase it. She charged me $1,200 for cleaning fees, but in the end, I cleaned her reviews and her reputation with nothing but the truth. That's the lesson I carry forward. Money comes and goes, but dignity, once reclaimed, becomes unshakable. This story wasn't just about a crooked landlord. It was about power, how it's used, how it's abused, and how it can be taken back. She thought she was untouchable, but she forgot one thing: people talk. And when people talk, when stories spread, even the biggest bully can be brought to their knees. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Think about the times someone tried to silence you, to make you feel small, to convince you your voice didn't matter. Now imagine what happens when you refuse to stay quiet, when your truth becomes a spark for others. That's how movements start. That's how justice multiplies. So if you've ever been scammed, silenced, or underestimated, this channel is your voice. Here, your stories matter. Here, we turn humiliation into empowerment and pain into purpose. Subscribe, share your story, and let's make sure the next scammer thinks twice before crossing someone like you or someone like us. Because together, we don't just survive their schemes, we rewrite the ending. And trust me, there's always another ending waiting to be written.